This is Codename Vermilion, reporting in from the Luno Eggy shop at Ice Lake City. I'm trying to buy a new hat, but this guy only accepts high die rolls as payment. So wish me luck. Uh-oh. When Genshin Impact first launched, there were a lot of people who wrote off the game as a simple Breath of the Wild clone. Well, even at launch Genshin had aspects that quickly showed how it diverged and became its own thing, it was easy to see why this criticism was repeated so often early in its lifespan. Mondstadt as a region heavily leans into a lot of environmental design that mimics Breath of the Wild. Hilichurls are an obvious replacement for Baklabins, and even small things like having a similar UI definitely didn't help it beat the allegations. Of course, it's now very easy to see that Genshin is very much its own thing, and half a decade later you'd be laughed out of the room if you still tried to argue that it's no more than a cheap Zelda clone. With how successful the game is, it's no surprise that other games would seek to imitate Genshin's formula, usually with one twist or another to differentiate itself. Wuthering Waves answers the question of, what if Genshin had depth to its combat? The upcoming Azure Promille seems like it'll be asking the question, what if Genshin was Palworld? But what if you asked, what if Genshin was Warframe? Well, the answer would be Duet Night Abyss. Developed by Hero Games, Duet Night Abyss is slated to be their first major foray into the gacha games market, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to try out the game in its first closed beta test. I'm not gonna lie to you, when I first saw the trailer for this game, there was only one detail that stood out to me that made it so that I wanted to investigate the game to the point where I'd participate in its beta. The part where a character started bullet jumping. I realize that for some of you, this may seem like a strange thing to fixate on, so give me a moment while I provide additional context. Bullet jumping is a movement mechanic whereby the character launches themselves, usually from the ground, and spins themselves in midair to gain extreme momentum or elevation in a matter of seconds. It can be used to completely change the character's momentum on a dime, leading to extreme player mobility. And most notably, it is a game mechanic that up until this point was exclusive to the game that originated it, Warframe. As someone who has logged over 3,700 hours into the funny Space Ninja game, this is why bullet jumping is such a big deal to me. To be honest, I'm surprised that it took this long for other games to copy this mechanic. And of course, it's just my luck that it's a gacha game that's doing so. As a registered loser, what do I think of Duet Night Abyss? It's complicated, so let's get into it. I first want to preface this by saying that it's very clear that DNA is still very early on in development. Some characters have yet to receive voice lines, certain areas have placeholder NPCs, and overall the game has yet to be polished, but that's fine. The purpose of the closed beta was to primarily test the waters. The developers want to know if they're even going in a direction that the players would be interested in. Oh, also they let us know up front that all accounts would be wiped at the end of the beta, which is standard practice for this type of test. That having been said, man, they really couldn't have cloned Warframe any harder if they tried. It was actually hilarious to me just how many things were copied, to the point where I was straight up cackling during entire segments of my time in the beta. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, nor am I going to do anything ridiculous like get offended on behalf of the Warframe community. After all, imitation is the highest form of flattery. And just in case you think I'm pulling the claim that DNA is a Warframe clone out of my butt, trust me when I say that it's obvious that it is. After all, in addition to bullet jumping, DNA has double jumping, aim gliding, sliding, wall climbing, summonable specters, Eximus enemies, hacking minigames, 3 forms of physical damage in addition to elemental damage, mods, forma, recolorable weapons, crafting that consumes blueprints, a melee system that consumes combo count to deal a heavy attack, Parazon finishers, transference, global chat, and copies of the following game modes: extermination, capture, defense, survival, excavation, hijack, and the Duviri circuit. Heck, there were even times I caught myself reverting to my Warframe muscle memory and pressing 4 instead of Q to ult. Now, some of the things I just mentioned sound ridiculous on their own. For example, there are plenty of games that abstract hacking into some kind of minigame. And indeed, Warframe has incorporated a lot of ubiquitous game mechanics over the years. The reason why I included them in this list is because DNA has copied the very distinct way Warframe has implemented them, and especially because altogether as a complete package, it makes up a large amount of Warframe's core gameplay loop. Beyond this, there were a number of things that just felt oddly familiar. This is probably going to sound like a stretch, or like I'm just going off of vibes, but even specific enemy types felt like they were added simply because Warframe has them. There were also environments in the game that had an uncanny resemblance to specific tile sets from Warframe. The Icy Mine environment was oddly similar to Grineer Asteroid Base, and the Ancient Ruins area feels strangely like the Void. Like, it's as though the layout of some of these tiles were reskinned with a fantasy anime art style. I know I'm going to sound absolutely off my rocker here, but it was the little details like the placement and orientation of lootable containers, or the laser cube in the Ancient Ruins area that was very clearly a death orb. Oh, and before I forget, while DNA certainly has characters with unique mechanics, there are also ones that are just straight up copies of Warframe. Berenica is Excalibur. This one is Hydroid. And this one is undeniably Mesa. And the only limited 5-star that was present in the beta is straight up just Titania. All of this begs the question, is it a problem that DNA copied Warframe? Well, yes, but not for the reasons you might think. I'm perfectly fine with games copying or straight up ripping off other games' mechanics. Heck, one of my favorite games is Palworld. My issue with how DNA copies Warframe is that it doesn't seem like there's much thought put into why Warframe has some of these mechanics. Or, to put it another way, there are certain things that are in DNA just because Warframe had it, and not because it actually fits with the sci-fantasy world that they're trying to create. Like, why do characters have shields? We never see anyone have them in the story. In Warframe, the basic premise is that they're the ultimate engineered soldiers in a sci-fi universe, so them having innate shields isn't out of place. Meanwhile, we don't see anyone equip stuff that could plausibly be a shield generator in DNA, so why do they innately have them? This is the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say it feels like they copied Warframe without considering the world they're trying to make. Of course, Warframe isn't the only game that they copied. The main character and her sister both look like Code Vein characters. The first major world location after the tutorial area is basically just Belobog from Honkai Star Rail. And of course, the gacha system is the now ubiquitous Genshin style of banners, but we'll get more into that later. Now before you think that this video is just going to be me bashing it for the whole runtime, let me highlight something I think DNA does really well. The dialogue system. It's like a lot of other RPGs, sure, but in addition to the occasional skill check that literally has you rolling dice like in D&D, DNA has a really unique way of handling the stats that you use for these stat checks. You see, every time you see this diagram appear in the corner, that means this is an opportunity for your character to grow one of their 5 stats, each corresponding to a particular character trait. Picking the lawful good type responses will increase your morality. Picking the insightful or discerning option will increase your wisdom. The emotional responses will increase your empathy. The oddball responses will increase your chaos. And the ones focused on pay, loot, treasure, etc. will increase a stat which is confusingly labeled benefit. I think it's named that way because the stat is focused on your character being opportunistic and jumping on things that benefit them, either directly or through things like increased reputation or a new connection with someone who you'd want to be on the good side of. But out of context, it's a bit hard to grasp what the stat means at first, and I think the devs really wanted to make it sound more neutral compared to a term like greed. Honestly, I really like this system. It makes me feel like I'm actually building up a character in the most organic way I've ever seen in a video game. It's the small choices that slowly accumulate over time rather than a big, obvious, you can pick the good choice or the evil choice that a lot of RPGs fall into. If I have high wisdom, it's because I've been acting wise, instead of the usual because I chose to dump more stat points into that trait. Plus, it's a great way to get your players to actually engage with the conversation at hand. These skill checks allow you to unlock alternate quest routes or even full-on side quests. They further incentivize the player by having a shop that gives you free goodies just for succeeding at a particular trait's skill check. You can also use a consumable to re-roll in case the dice gave you a hard time, although it was never really clear to me how you got more of these things. This system is so good that it even got me to talk to random NPCs on the street, because a big portion of them had more opportunities to increase my character traits. If there is anything they should keep from the closed beta, it's this system. Whoever came up with this or decided to copy it from a game I haven't played before, well done. On the topic of quests and dialogue, let's talk about the story of DNA's closed beta test. If you don't want any spoilers, you can skip ahead to the timestamp shown on the screen. I also mark it as a chapter so you can just hit the button to skip to the next chapter. Alright, everybody who's still here, I assume you're good with spoilers, yeah? Okay, so I'm not gonna lie to you, the beginning of the game is pretty weak, because it goes through all the standard tropes for this kind of game. It's not bad, but it's nothing special either. At least, not until this moment.
Tosan! なんだ貴様この
Yeah, DNA gets pretty dark. You learn about the Empire and how the Charons, a race of people who largely look like standard humans with features such as horns or tails, are systematically oppressed. It does kind of fall into the minor pitfall of giving the normal humans a legitimate reason for why they fear the Charons. Many gain potent magical capabilities later in life and become highly dangerous, but it's at least understandable, especially since this so-called dark magic is almost treated as infectious in the narrative. The main character herself is a Charon as well, and her special magic ability is Resonance, which is basically transference from Warframe. You befriend a girl named Psyche, who manages to convince her caretaker Henrik into letting you stay at his second property. Henrik is a gruff and somewhat callous rich man, but it's through Psyche's kind heart that you're prevented from being homeless. She even helps you go on a quest to find an item that would get you enough money to start paying for food and board. An ordeal that is complicated by a sudden boss fight and then a random stranger stealing the item from out under you. I'm not gonna lie, I was ready to throw hands with Outsider right here, but as it turns out, he'll pay you for it if you help him out, which turns out to be the infiltration of Henrik's main residence, the Hypnos home. Psyche is not the only person living there, and it's said that a number of Charons have gone to live there only to never return. Since Henrik was the original buyer for the crystal Outsider took from you, all you have to do is try and do some snooping while delivering the crystal to him, meaning that you get paid for the crystal and a little something from Outsider while you're at it. It's a win-win. When you poke around the Hypnos home, you manage to figure out a few clues. All the Charons there are afflicted with some kind of illness, Henrik's lab is closely guarded, and there's a specific night every month where Henrik leaves the home. This, combined with the knowledge that Henrik's lab has an unguarded chimney, gives Outsider the window he needs to slip in and investigate. He isn't able to be there for long, but he finds notes on a mysterious project and a scheduled end date for each Charon living there. Meanwhile, you spy on what Henrik gets up to on the rare occasions he does leave the Hypnos house, and you find that he goes to a nearby lake and drops in a small wooden box. You retrieve the box only to find it empty, save for some kind of sludge. Meeting with Outsider, it's not hard to put two and two together and deduce that Henrik is killing the Charons living at the Hypnos house, incinerating the bodies, and then throwing the ashes into the lake to wash away the evidence. And the worst part? Psyche's end date is in just a few days. You hatch a scheme to try and break out Psyche and the other Charons living there, but for some reason, Psyche is convinced that she can't leave. Her illness is worsening, and Henrik is on full alert as her end date nears. You rush back to the city to try and break Psyche out by force, but on the way back you have an encounter with the town's gate guard that reveals a crucial bit of information. When Charons approach the age where their magical powers awaken, if they fail to awaken, they become afflicted with an illness known as deterioration. Instead of supernatural ability, they become monsters, ones that have killed many innocent people in the past. If someone is known to be deteriorating, harboring them is a grave crime in the Empire. You rush back to the Hypnos house only to find out that it's too late. Psyche has deteriorated and gone berserk, mortally wounding Henrik in the process. As it turns out, he's a doctor who's trying to cure deterioration. But since he has still yet to find the cure, he instead gives the Charons afflicted with it a peaceful death rather than having them be executed by the state. That's why there was so much secrecy and the suspicious act of washing away the ashes. By the law of the Empire, he would be hung for doing such a thing. Behind that gruff exterior was a heart of gold, one that soon ceases beating. His dying wish is for you to stop Psyche before it's too late. Rushing to the edge of town, a storm awaits you. Psyche's new monstrous form. We see the struggle that Psyche has within herself to regain control, and through the main character's efforts, she regains lucidity. But that's not enough. It takes a lot of guts to kill off a playable character. DNA would immediately stand out in the gacha game market if they kept this dark tone in the story, because unlike many other gacha games where the playable characters have invincible plot armor, DNA would have a story that has actual stakes. The other way that it stands out is the fact that this is only the first half of the story so far. In your darkest moments, you're transported to a strange scene with swords embedded into an ever-growing mound of sand, and an ethereal figure who intervenes to save you. Whether it's just a vision or truly real is unknown, right until he says it's time to begin his journey. And then it enters character creation for a second time. This time with the male protagonist instead of the female one. I'm not gonna lie, this was such a crazy story drop for me that I was genuinely stunned. Now, I assume in the final release, you'll get to choose which character does the first half of the story, and then the corresponding opposite will be in the second half, but there's a part of me that was so blown away by the fact that there was, in fact, a male main character the whole time, that I kinda hope they keep the facade of, oh, we just haven't had a chance to add the male main character yet. It also helps that the male main character's story, despite not having voice acting yet, is far more engaging right from the get-go. You are a captain in the Imperial Army, fighting against the Forsakens, a group of Sharons who have been terrorizing the Empire. They've managed to capture one of the Empire's own fortresses, and your battalion's fight to retake it has been costly. What follows is a tale of sacrifice, hardship, betrayal, political intrigue, and the desperate fight to simply survive the horrors of war. It also helps that it features Daphne, my beloved. While the boss fight that caps off this chapter definitely needs some work, because all she does is spam an attack that gives her something like 20 seconds of invincibility way too often, I'm very much looking forward to see where the developers take the story from this point onward. Alright, so while I was actually engaged with and enjoying the story, that still doesn't mean that DNA doesn't have other challenges standing in its way before it's ready for full release. For one, while the movement is alright, it feels stiff compared to Warframe's. I know that Warframe's buttery smooth and fluid movement is a tough act to follow, but for something so core to the gameplay loop, there are a few things that need addressing. For starters, characters move way too slowly when you're not bullet jumping, and there's no real way to sprint any faster. I get why dodges are limited, but I think you should get at least 3 of them. You also can't really dodge when firing your weapon, which needs to change, especially if they want to turn up the difficulty of the boss fights. There's also no way to aim glide in DNA without firing your weapon, which means you have to waste ammo if you want to preserve your momentum, which feels bad. Also, dodging in midair seems to kill your momentum for some reason, which is counterintuitive, especially coming from Warframe where I always dodge roll at the end of a bullet jump to gain even more speed. Ironing out these kinks in the movement will make it the king of movement in the gacha game market. Speaking of which, I'm sure a lot of you have been curious as to how the gacha stacks up compared to other titles. For the most part, it's pretty standard going. There's a discounted beginner banner that takes standard rolls, and the event character, event weapon, and standard banners. Where I think DNA stands out is there's actually 2 event character banners. One where you have a 50-50 like Genshin, and one where the event character is guaranteed within 90 rolls, but goes away once you get a copy of the event character. This is very based for a gacha game. Typically, modern gacha games give you around 90 rolls every patch, and if DNA follows this same model, that means free-to-play players can realistically always unlock the event character with the system, while still having the obligatory whale bait. Also, I'm 99% sure that this was just a feature to allow beta testers to try out more stuff, but there was a shop that let you outright buy a standard 5-star character or weapon with 1 Luno coin. They should keep something similar to this in the final release. Heck, I'd take it even further and let players direct purchase previous event characters who are off-banner. That would certainly give it the edge over Wua's shop and ensure that players always have the ability to unlock the roster of characters without needing to wait for a rerun. The closed beta test didn't have a battle pass or daily quests, but I wouldn't be surprised if they get added in a later test or the full release. The only thing that I ask is that DNA keep its dailies to 15 minutes or faster. Inevitably, another question that will have to be answered is, why would I play DNA instead of just playing Warframe? Well, for one, actually good boss fights. I wouldn't say they are perfect, but they were for the most part actually fun instead of a bunch of waiting for the boss to actually be vulnerable to damage, or the more recent design sin, damage attenuation. In the beta, you could replay the boss fights 50 times in a week, which I'm almost certain is just a thing to allow the beta testers to try out boss fights a bunch of times and not reflective of the final release, but it definitely looks like the weekly boss fight grind will be important in the future. They definitely still need a lot of work though, because some bosses don't have their weak points out for long enough. And there are some bosses that just don't even have weak points, and all bosses lack audio cues for when they're about to attack. There's also no opportunities to refill on ammo mid-fight, so if you run out, which can easily happen, your progress on beating the fight screeches to a halt, especially considering engaging bosses in melee is basically suicide. The easiest way to achieve this would be to have segments where the boss spawns adds you can kill for health and ammo drops. It would also help if the perfect dodge mechanic that they introduced for like one boss fight and then never used again was just a part of the core combat and could be triggered by perfect dodging any enemy's attack. In terms of other evergreen content, there are the cloned Warframe game modes that let you spend your daily stamina, but I really hope they touch these up in the final release. As funny as it is to just cheese it by summoning 2 specters and letting them do the heavy lifting, the final release needs to let you just sweep already completed stages, or this is gonna get old really fast. Hey, Future Vermilion here. They put out an article about the feedback they received during the closed beta test, and they're gonna let players spend multiples of the stamina in order to get multiplied rewards, which is a fairly alright compromise. I still don't think this is a great solution, but it's at least something. It also just feels like the fundamental design philosophy of a gacha game is at odds with Warframe's progression model. You see, in Warframe, you can get all the Warframes and equipment for free just by playing the game. Need a part for a new gun? No problem, you can grind it out here, but it's not guaranteed. With enough tries though, you can get it. Meanwhile, gacha games generally just give you what you want when you seek it out, with the caveat that you can only get so much per day, time gating it by requiring you to spend stamina. Do you see the problem? Even though survival and defense modes are faster than Warframe, defense only requiring 3 waves instead of 5, and 3 minutes for survival instead of 5, that's still much slower than games like GENSHIN where I can hammer out a domain run in under a minute, sometimes less than 30 seconds if I'm locked in. Or if it's a game that lets me sweep the stage, it's basically instant. And it's not like you can continually grind to progress further in DNA because you need stamina to play these game modes. So as it stands, you basically get the worst of both worlds. The game both demands your active time and your long-term commitment to keep up with the time gating. I didn't play any missions in co-op because the few times I tried, there wasn't anybody in matchmaking. Although I'm sure I could have found somebody in global chat to play with. But what happens if you and a friend want to play DNA together, but one of you is out of stamina? Are you just kinda out of luck? This is another example of why I said earlier it feels like they copied Warframe without considering how it fit into the game they're trying to make. They need more to distinguish DNA from Warframe, lest it become Warframe but for people with gambling addictions. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really hard to compete with Warframe in general. In DNA, you have to use consumable dyes to recolor your weapons, while in Warframe, you get a small selection of colors for free and additional free color palettes given out through the various holiday events they have each year. They need to make DNA's dyes be a permanent unlock in order to compete with this. It also doesn't help that DNA's art style is pretty rough right now. It feels very bootleggy, and calling enemies filthoids only contributes to that. Filthoid? Seriously? That sounds like a slur from the Gundam universe. I will have to say though, I quite enjoyed DNA's character customization. You can equip up to 4 accessories on your characters, which is a surprising amount of control they give the player in an industry where you're lucky if your favorite character even gets a skin. It's no Code Vein, but it's a feature that is criminally underutilized in the gacha market. I also can't help but wonder to what degree getting lucky with the gacha will impact your experience with the game. I rolled Mesa and a shotgun that is actually a rocket launcher with projectiles that follow my cursor, which pretty much trivialized anything below level 40. after which enemies spike in durability for some reason. They really need to smoothen out that level curve because it almost feels like hitting a wall. Meanwhile, I could see someone who only rolled crap like the kid who drops bombs and the basic assault rifle having a really bad time, because quite frankly, there's a huge disparity between the strong and weak characters and equipment in the game. Seriously, that assault rifle is so freaking bad, it needs a massive damage buff. My scythe that was level 20 was doing more damage than the assault rifle at level 40, which killed like 8 dudes and then ran out of ammo. Meanwhile, my rocket launcher one-shots anything below level 40, always ragdolls anything that isn't a boss in the explosion radius, and has absurd ammo efficiency because it's considered a shotgun. Oh, also, for non-explosive weapons, there is a hilarious amount of aim assists on keyboard and mouse, to the point where it was nearly aimbotting for me. They should probably tone that down for PC players so that there's some semblance of gunplay. Characters also need a big balance pass in order to feel remotely in the same league of power as each other. On one hand, you've got Hellfire, who is a tank with the power to completely trivialize the grinding game modes. And then you've got Randy, whose power is preventing you from playing the game. Other miscellaneous rough patches include stuff like how elements are handled in the game. While demon wedges are fixed stat items, meaning there is no artifact grind for this game. Thank heavens. There are no demon wedges that let you add an element or change the elemental damage a weapon does. Your weapon simply does the same elemental damage type as the character you're playing, which means there's almost no opportunities for depth since you only play as one character at a time and can't swap characters while in combat. I am also annoyed that the few chests that need you to proc pyro on them rely on your trigger chance, which is status chance for you Warframe players. They should just make it so that if you use that element on the chest, it opens, like Genshin. Otherwise, it wastes the player's time for no reason. It's already annoying enough to have to swap characters if you're not playing the right element at that time. If they don't add the ability to customize your weapon's element to be different from your character's, at least make it so that each weapon has their own innate element instead of getting overridden by which character you play. Otherwise, it'll just devolve into doing different colored numbers depending on what character you have active, instead of letting you combo elements for more dynamic gameplay. In general, swapping characters and equipment is rather annoying. There isn't a way to save custom loadouts, and the game doesn't even let you change your equipment before entering a mission. It just assumes you already have what you want equipped and goes right into the mission. Speaking of missions, there is one major game mode I haven't touched on yet, the maze. It's basically if Warframe's Duviri circuit was Elysian Realm from Honkai 3rd, which is to say a roguelike mode that takes place in a strange abstract dimension. It's very clearly unfinished because the only combat available is kill 20 enemies or kill one mini-boss. This badly needs more variety because otherwise you get the unintentionally hilarious situation where the game has you choose between the next objective being kill 20 enemies or kill 20 enemies. Even so, the bones of the mode are good, and the long-term progression for it feels really impactful. I could see it being a proper endgame for DNA if done right. Side note, I'm also very impressed that there is no loading screen between stages in the maze. Neither Elysian Realm nor Star Rail Simulated Universe achieves this. The devs that figured this out did good. All in all, Duet Night Abyss shows promise, but still has a long way to go. I'm very interested to see how the game changes between now and the next beta test, and especially how they will take Warframe's formula and iterate on it so they find an identity of their own. This has been Codename Vermilion. End of report.
Join us, embrace